The Effects of Inclusion on Student Perspective and Initiated Interactions with Students with Severe Disabilities by Madison Blank. Self-contained special education classrooms educate students with the most severe disabilities in cognition, functioning, communication, medical, and behavior. Self-contained classrooms consist of multiple grade levels with specific goals for students based on their individual needs. Students who are educated in the self-contained classroom require inclusion activities in order to interact with those typically developing peers. Those peers are not a part of their regular school day. Payne Elementary School has 2 self-contained classrooms. General education students at Payne Elementary School do not have consistent opportunities to interact with students who are educated in the self-contained classrooms. This study will measure the change in typical peers' interactions and perceptions of special education students when provided opportunities to interact with students who have severe disabilities. Measuring the change in interactions and perceptions will help to determine if increased exposure affects the perspectives and quality of interactions between typical peers and peers who have severe disabilities. This graph represents second grade students at Payne Elementary School. This data shows 2 second grade students who are educated in a self-contained classroom and 223 second grade students who are educated in the general education classroom. Many of the students who are educated in the general education environment have never interacted with the students who are educated in the self-contained classroom. Inclusion is a well-supported practice believed to improve the overall perspective and acceptance of students with disabilities. Administrators have reported that inclusion opportunities, such as peer buddies, lunch inclusion, or peer tutoring, have promoted a more caring and inclusive classroom and school environment. For this study, several sampling methods will be used. For random sampling, one of the 12 second grade classrooms will be randomly selected to participate in this study. This will ensure that the classroom chosen will be bias-free. Each second grade classroom is already diversified when class roles are determined for the start of the school year. Representative sampling will be used when the 10 students from the selected second grade classroom will participate in this study. Representative sampling will occur to ensure that an equal number of female and male participants are selected to participate. The project director should allocate time to plan and schedule with the selected second grade classroom. The project director will meet with the general education teacher to fully explain the study and the expectations of the students. The director must gather resources and activities to conduct structured inclusion opportunities within the self-contained classroom. The special ed teacher will gather materials for crafts, select dance or movement videos, and have board games on hand. Interview questions and data sheets will be created by the project director to be used throughout the study. The special education teacher and the general education teacher must work together to schedule these structured inclusion activities. Students educated in the self-contained classroom will interact with the participants in the study through structured inclusion activities within the self-contained classroom. Each participant will spend the same amount of time interacting in the self-contained classroom, and the special education teacher and paraprofessionals must be actively engaged in the activities in order to ensure the safety of all students. First, initial interviews of each participant on their perspectives and experiences with students with severe disabilities educated in a self-contained classroom will take place. Next, random sampling will separate participants from the selected general education classroom into pairs. Each pair will then join the self-contained classroom for a 15-minute free play session where observational data will be recorded on the participants' initiated interactions with the special education students. Random sampling will then select 5 girls and 5 boys from the pool of participants from the second grade classroom. The selected participants will participate in a structured inclusion activity in pairs of 2. 10 minutes will consist of a craft, 10 minutes will consist of a dance or movement video, and 10 minutes will consist of a board game. All participants will then participate in a final interview with the project director on their perspectives and experiences with students with severe disabilities who are educated in a self-contained classroom. All participants will be split back into pairs that were used in the initial free play activity. Each pair will join the self-contained classroom for a free play session. Observational data will be taken on the general education students' initiated interactions with special education students. For the interview questions will consist of questions that has language geared towards second grade students. The questions asked will be the same in both the initial and the final interview, and the interviewer will write the interviewee's responses to each question word for word in order to ensure validity. For the data sheets, the data sheet that indicates initiated interactions will be the same for the initial and the final free play session. The observation sheet will consist of tally marks to represent how many initiated interactions each typical peer has with students with disabilities. This instrument is reliable as an initiated interaction will be explicitly explained prior to the study in order to stay consistent when collecting data on initiated interactions from typical peers. There are several limitations and considerations to take into account for this study. The subject characteristic trait. A typically developing participant may be shy and not choose to interact with the self-contained students. This does not automatically mean the student does not want to interact or has a bias or a preconceived notion of students with disabilities. This will not impede the validity of the data, as it is assumed that all second grade classrooms are made up of students who are shy as well as students who are outgoing. The mortality threat would be absent students. In order to control that, pairs of typical students will only be pulled for free play sessions if both students are present. Free play or structured inclusion activities will be rescheduled as needed. For behavior or crises. Behaviors or student crises might interfere with a typical student's desire to interact with the student with disabilities. If a self-contained student is in a crisis or exhibiting dangerous behaviors, the free play or structured inclusion activity will end immediately and will be rescheduled. The safety of the students and all participants is the #1 priority. At the end of the study, the results of the 20 initial interviews will be analyzed to determine their initial perspective of students with severe disabilities. This data will then be compared to the 20 final interview answers to determine if the structured inclusion activities change the perspective that typically developing students have towards students with severe disabilities who are educated in that self-contained classroom. The data collection sheets from the observations during the initial free play session will then be compared to those from the observations during the final free play sessions. This data will show if there was an increase in initiated interactions that typical peers have with peers with severe disabilities. When reflecting on this study and this data project, I had a few things that came to mind that would be beneficial for this study. If multiple trials of this study with the same students were conducted throughout the school year, that gives the typical students more time to learn the students with disabilities, to learn the students in the self-contained classroom. It'll be interesting to see as time goes on if those initiated interactions, if they became stronger with more exposure and consistent exposure with the students with severe disabilities. I also would like to try a study like this and to get information on how that inclusion looks in different environments. How do typically developing students interact with these students with severe disabilities when they're at recess? What about when they're at lunch? What about when they're at PE? This study, if looking through multiple environments, would give better insight on the effects and the positive benefits of inclusion between typically developing peers and peers with severe disabilities.